The Grand Assembly Station of Orionis Prime was the largest artificial structure ever constructed in the known galaxy. It did not orbit a planet. It did not orbit a star. Instead, it hung in the darkness between systems like a second sun made of metal and glass, its vast ring structures stretching nearly 3,000 kilometers across. From a distance, it looked like a crown of silver fire suspended in the void. Inside that crown was the hull of civilizations. A chamber so vast that the ceiling disappeared into darkness high above, where artificial stars glowed faintly like distant constellations. Rows upon rows of platforms rose upward in a massive spiral, each one reserved for a different species of the Galactic Concord. More than 300 civilizations sat within that chamber. Some were tall and skeletal, their bodies thin as blades of metal. Some were vast beings of gas contained within transparent energy spheres. Some were crystalline entities whose bodies refracted light into rainbows that danced across the chamber walls. Others had no physical form at all, appearing only as shimmering holographic projections of living mathematics. Together they ruled the galaxy. For over 10,000 years, the Concord had governed the stars. They regulated trade. They enforced peace between species. They controlled the ancient faster-than-light lanes that connected the spiral arms of the galaxy like threads in a cosmic web. To be recognized by the Concord was to be acknowledged as a civilized species. To be rejected was to be condemned to obscurity. And today, a new species had come to ask for that recognition. At the very bottom of the chamber, standing alone on a small circle of white light barely 2 meters wide, was a single human, Ambassador Elena Marquez. She was 52 years old. Her dark hair had begun to turn gray at the temples, and faint lines marked the corners of her eyes. She wore a formal black diplomatic suit, the emblem of the United Earth Coalition pinned to her collar. Compared to the towering alien delegations above her, she looked impossibly small. 300 species watched her from every direction. Some leaned forward with curiosity. Others studied her the way a scientist studies an unusual insect. A few looked openly amused. Humanity was new to the stars. Only 63 years earlier, the first human ship had discovered the ruins of an alien probe drifting through the outer solar system. Reverse engineering that technology had given humanity a crude but functional faster-than-light drive. In the decades since, humans had spread quickly. Colonies on Mars. Research stations orbiting Jupiter. Mining settlements in the asteroid belt. By human standards, it had been an incredible achievement. By galactic standards, it was nothing. The Concord represented civilizations that had explored the stars for millions of years. Humanity was barely out of its cradle. And yet the humans had come anyway. They had come to request membership among the powers of the galaxy. Ambassador Marquez stood perfectly still in the center of that circle of light. She knew how the scene looked. One small human surrounded by the accumulated authority of 300 alien empires. But she did not bow her head. She did not look nervous. She simply waited. High above her, the central dais began to glow. A towering alien figure unfolded from its resting position. The being belonged to the Valari Collective, one of the oldest species in the Concord. Its body resembled a vast lattice of living crystal, shifting slowly as energy pulsed through its transparent structure. When it spoke, the translation system transformed its alien vibrations into calm, emotionless human words. Representative of the species known as humanity. The chamber fell silent. Even species that communicated through light or electromagnetic pulses quieted their signals. Every eye in the hall turned toward the human below. You have requested recognition as a member civilization of the Galactic Concord. The pause. Energy flickered through the crystal lattice. Your request will now be evaluated. Ambassador Marquez lifted her chin slightly. 300 alien civilizations were about to judge whether humanity belonged among the stars. And the entire galaxy was watching. The Valari delegate remained motionless at the top of the chamber, its crystalline body glowing faintly as streams of data moved through the Concord's shared intelligence network. When it spoke again, the voice that filled the chamber was calm and clinical. Before a species is granted membership in the Galactic Concord, its history must be examined. A series of enormous holographic displays ignited in the air above the assembly. The first image showed a small blue planet spinning slowly in darkness. Your species has existed for approximately 300,000 standard years. The hologram shifted. Images began flashing rapidly through the air. Explosions. Cities burning. During that time, the Valari continued, your species has engaged in over 40,000 documented armed conflicts. Another image appeared. Human armies clashing across continents. Nuclear detonations blooming like terrible suns. You developed weapons capable of destroying your own biosphere before achieving stable planetary governance. A ripple moved through the assembly platforms. Several species emitted signals that translated into amusement. Another hologram appeared. Earth's forests shrinking. Oceans clouded with pollution. Species going extinct. You have eliminated more than half of your planet's native life forms in the span of only a few thousand years. The Valari paused. And yet you seek entry into the Concord. Ambassador Marquez remained still. Her hands rested calmly at her sides. High above her, another platform illuminated. A tall alien rose from a pool of dark liquid. The being's body resembled a collection of translucent tendrils drifting within a floating sphere of fluid. The translation system identified the species as Urathi. Their voice sounded almost curious. Your species has not achieved true planetary unity. Another set of images appeared. Political borders. Conflicting governments. Military forces belonging to different nations. You maintain separate power structures, separate armies, separate economic systems. The Urathi pulsed with faint orange light. How can a species that cannot fully cooperate with itself be trusted to cooperate with others? A third voice interrupted. This one came from a massive platform near the center of the chamber. The being that stood there looked like a mountain of living stone. Its species had been members of the Concord for nearly 6 million years. When it spoke, the sound resembled grinding tectonic plates. We have observed your cultural transmissions. A series of human broadcasts appeared above the chamber. Arguments. Protests. Political conflict. Social divisions. You are loud. Another pause. You are unstable. A low murmur spread through the chamber. Delegates began activating their microphones. Voices layered over each other in a rising wave of criticism. Humans show excessive emotional volatility. They demonstrate dangerous levels of technological creativity. They lack collective discipline. They display unpredictable behavioral patterns. Ambassador Marquez listened to it all. For nearly 2 hours, the representatives of the galaxy spoke. Some were polite. Some were openly contemptuous. One species compared humanity to a primitive predator that had accidentally discovered fire. Another suggested humanity should be observed for another 1,000 years before being allowed near advanced civilizations. Through it all, Marquez remained silent. Finally, the Valari delegate spoke again. The Concord has completed its evaluation. The chamber fell quiet instantly. Humanity is considered energetic, innovative, and capable of rapid technological adaptation. The pause. However, the word echoed through the chamber. These same qualities present an unacceptable level of risk. Another hologram appeared. It showed a projection of humanity's future expansion if allowed unrestricted access to the galaxy. Colonies spreading rapidly. Human industry expanding across star systems. Human fleets growing larger. You are unpredictable. The Valari's voice grew colder. You are violent. Another pause. And most concerning of all, the hologram shifted again. Human scientists. Human inventors. Human engineers testing experimental technologies. You are dangerously creative. The chamber grew completely silent. The Valari delivered the conclusion without emotion. Therefore, the Galactic Concord cannot approve humanity's request for membership. For the first time, Ambassador Marquez spoke. Her voice carried clearly across the enormous hall. May I ask on what grounds? The Valari did not hesitate, on the grounds that your species represents a potential destabilizing force within galactic civilization. Another platform lit up near the highest levels of the chamber. Every delegate immediately fell silent. Something far more powerful had decided to speak. At the very top of the assembly sat the Thalarhive Dominion. Thousands of insect-like bodies rested there, their black exoskeletons reflecting faint green light. But they were not individuals. They were extensions of a single mind. The Overmind, the most powerful political intelligence in the galaxy. When it spoke, the chamber seemed to grow colder. The Concord has determined that humanity cannot be permitted to expand freely among the stars. Ambassador Marquez felt every eye in the chamber turn toward her. The Overmind continued. However, a faint ripple moved through the alien platforms. The Concord is not without compassion. The Overmind's glowing eyes focused on the human below. Humanity will be offered an alternative. And for the first time that day, Ambassador Elena Marquez felt a quiet sense of dread settle in her chest. The chamber had grown so quiet that Ambassador Elena Marquez could hear the faint hum of the station's atmosphere processors high above the hull. 300 alien civilizations waited. The Overmind of the Thalarhive Dominion studied her from the highest tier of the assembly. Thousands of black insectoid bodies sat motionless in perfect synchronization, their glowing green eyes fixed on the lone human standing below. When the Overmind spoke again, its voice carried the calm certainty of absolute authority. Humanity will not be granted membership in the Galactic Concord. No one in the chamber seemed surprised. But the Overmind continued. However, the Concord recognizes that your species has demonstrated significant technological potential. A faint ripple passed through the assembly. Potential that could, under proper supervision, be directed toward acceptable development. Marquez felt the weight of the moment settle heavily across the chamber. What kind of supervision? She asked carefully. The Overmind did not pause. The Concord offers humanity admission under the Compliance Accords. A few alien delegations shifted uncomfortably. Several species exchanged signals of concern. Even among the oldest civilizations, the Compliance Accords were controversial. Marquez frowned slightly. I am not familiar with those protocols. The Valari delegate answered. The Compliance Accords exist for species whose developmental patterns indicate instability. A series of holographic projections appeared above the chamber. Alien worlds. Alien civilizations. Species that looked calm, quiet, strangely uniform. Under the Compliance Accords, the Valari explained, a developing civilization receives guidance from the Concord until it achieves acceptable behavioral stability. Marquez's voice was steady. And what does that guidance involve? The Valari answered with clinical precision. All human military vessels and advanced weapons systems will be surrendered to the Concord for dismantlement. The pause. Human governments will be replaced with a unified administrative authority supervised by Concord officials. Another pause. Most importantly, the chamber grew colder. Your population will undergo neural harmonization. The words hung in the air like poison. Marquez did not react immediately. She already knew what the term meant. Every species in the Concord knew. Neural harmonization was not execution. It was something worse. The Valari continued. The process alters neurological structures associated with aggression, excessive individualism, and unpredictable behavior. Images appeared above the chamber. Alien citizens moving peacefully through perfect cities. Quiet. Orderly. Too orderly. The result, the Valari concluded, is a stable, cooperative society capable of functioning safely within the Concord. Marquez's voice dropped slightly. You mean mind control? The Valari responded without emotion. We mean behavioral correction. The Overmind spoke again. This supervision would last for 500 standard years. Another ripple moved through the chamber. At the end of that period, the Overmind continued, humanity's application for membership will be reconsidered. Reconsidered. Not approved. Reconsidered. Marquez looked slowly around the enormous chamber. 300 species watched her. Some with curiosity. some with pity, some with quiet satisfaction. They believed the choice was obvious. Submission or extinction. Marquez took a slow breath. And if humanity refuses? The Overmind answered immediately. Then humanity will be isolated. A holographic projection appeared above the chamber. It showed the human solar system surrounded by a shimmering field of distorted space. A dimensional barrier will be constructed around your system. The Valari explained. This barrier will prevent all faster-than-light travel in or out. Another projection appeared. Human ships approaching the barrier and being turned away. You will have no trade, no communication, no contact with the galaxy. The Overmind's voice remained calm. You will remain confined within your own solar system until such time as the Concord determines your species has matured. Marquez asked the obvious question. How long would that take? The Overmind responded without hesitation. As long as necessary. A silence spread through the chamber. Several alien delegates leaned forward slightly. The moment had arrived. Submission or exile. Marquez thought about Earth. About the billions of humans living under its blue skies. About the colonies on Mars and Titan. About her daughter, who had once told her she wanted to fly among the stars. And she imagined that daughter living under a government that could reach into her mind and rewrite who she was. Remove her anger. Remove her curiosity. Remove her stubbornness. Remove everything that made her human. Marquez closed her eyes for a brief moment. Then she opened them again. Her voice was calm, unshakable. On behalf of the United Earth Coalition, she looked directly up at the Overmind. Humanity respectfully declines the compliance accords. The chamber exploded. Voices erupted from hundreds of alien delegations. Outrage. Disbelief. The Overmind raised a single limb. The chamber instantly fell silent again. You understand the consequences of this decision, the Overmind said. Marquez nodded. Yes. You will be alone. She held the Overmind's gaze. We always have each other. The Overmind studied her for a long moment. Then it spoke the final words. So be it. Ambassador Elena Marquez left the Grand Assembly Station alone. No one tried to stop her. No one tried to change her mind. The Concord had already made its decision. 2 silent Thaler guards escorted her through corridors that seemed impossibly large compared to the single human walking between them. Alien diplomats stepped aside as she passed, their strange eyes following her with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. Some of them could not understand why a species would choose exile over obedience. Others understood perfectly. Marquez did not look back. Her shuttle departed the station less than an hour later, its engines flaring blue as it turned toward the distant spiral arm that held humanity's home system. For 3 days she traveled through the Concord's vast network of faster-than-light corridors. During that journey she sent a single transmission to Earth. A message that would change the future of the human species forever. The barrier wall activated the moment her shuttle crossed into human territory. It began as a faint vibration in the fabric of space. Sensors aboard the shuttle registered massive gravitational distortions forming at the outer edges of the solar system. Then the sky itself began to change. Across Earth, billions of people looked up. A faint violet shimmer spread across the heavens like ripples moving across water. It was beautiful, terrifyingly beautiful. The light expanded outward until it surrounded the entire solar system. A sphere of warped spacetime stretching beyond Pluto. For 72 hours the sky glowed. Then the light faded. But the barrier remained. Human ships attempting to leave the system were violently pushed back by invisible forces. Long-range communications fell silent. Signals from alien trade networks vanished. Cargo vessels approaching from outside the system turned around and disappeared into the stars. Within a week, every trace of alien presence had vanished. Humanity was alone. The reaction on Earth was immediate and chaotic. News networks broadcast the story across every continent. The Galactic Concord has exiled humanity. The solar system has been sealed. We are completely cut off from the galaxy. Panic spread quickly. Governments held emergency sessions that lasted through the night. Military commanders demanded explanations. Economists warned that interstellar trade had become critical to several supply chains. Without it, entire industries could collapse. On Mars, the colony of New Horizon nearly lost its atmospheric stabilizers when replacement components from an alien manufacturer failed to arrive. On Titan, power grids dependent on imported reactor fuel began shutting down one city at a time. Within months, shortages began appearing across the solar system. Alien alloys used in spacecraft construction vanished from supply lines. Medical compounds developed by off-world laboratories became impossible to obtain. Factories slowed. Prices climbed. On Earth, riots erupted in several major cities. People demanded answers. Some blamed Ambassador Marquez for refusing the Concord's offer. Others argued that submission would have been worse. Political alliances fractured. Old rivalries resurfaced. Several regional conflicts reignited as governments struggled to maintain stability. For a time, it seemed the Concorde might have been right about humanity. Maybe humans really were too chaotic, too divided, too unstable to survive on their own. Ambassador Marquez returned to Earth 3 weeks after the barrier activated. She was immediately summoned before the United Earth Emergency Assembly, where leaders from every nation and colony had gathered to decide what humanity would do next. The chamber was filled with shouting. Accusations flew across the room. You should have accepted the agreement. You had no right to decide this for all of us. You condemned humanity to isolation. Marquez stood silently at the podium while the arguments raged. Eventually the shouting stopped. Not because the leaders had reached agreement, but because they had run out of breath. When the room finally fell quiet, Marquez spoke. I understand your anger. Her voice was calm but firm. I understand your fear. She paused. But you deserve to know the truth about what the Concorde offered us. She told them everything. About the compliance accords. About neural harmonization. About the 500 years of supervision. About what it would mean to surrender the independence of the human mind. By the time she finished speaking, the chamber was silent again. Several leaders sat frozen in their seats. Others stared down at the floor. They were not asking us to join their civilization, Marquez said quietly. They were asking us to stop being human. She let that sink in. Then she spoke the words that would echo across human history. I would rather humanity live alone among the stars than survive as someone else's obedient creation. The silence lasted several seconds. Then someone in the chamber began to clap. Another joined them. Then another. Within moments the entire assembly had risen to its feet. The sound rolled through the hall like thunder. That night, 3 words appeared painted across the outer wall of the assembly building in Geneva. No one knew who wrote them. But by morning the phrase had spread across Earth. Across Mars. Across every human colony. It appeared on city walls. On digital billboards. On spacecraft hulls. 3 simple words. Never kneel again. Humanity did not know how long the exile would last. It could be centuries. Maybe longer. But one thing had become clear. If humanity was going to survive inside this cage, it would have to rely on something the Concorde had never fully understood. Human stubbornness. The first year of exile was the hardest year humanity had faced since the beginning of the space age. The loss of galactic trade did not simply slow the economy. It broke it. Entire industries had quietly become dependent on alien materials and technology during the short decades humanity had been connected to the wider galaxy. When those connections vanished, the consequences were immediate. Factories shut down across Earth and Mars. Spacecraft construction yards in the asteroid belt halted production when shipments of alien composite alloys stopped arriving. Hospitals struggled when several advanced medical treatments, developed using alien biochemical compounds, ran out of supply. Human civilization had grown used to the advantages of galactic technology. Now it had to survive without it. At first, the response was panic. Financial markets collapsed. Supply chains disintegrated. Several governments nearly fell as political tensions exploded under the pressure. For a brief moment, It seemed possible that humanity might destroy itself long before the Concord's exile ever had the chance. But then something began to change. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly, almost quietly. Humanity began to adapt. The first signs appeared in laboratories. Scientists who had spent decades working with alien technologies suddenly found themselves forced to do something they had not needed to do before. They had to understand those technologies completely. Every molecule, every equation, every physical principle behind them. One of the first breakthroughs came from a small research team in Buenos Aires. A materials scientist named Dr. Javier Correa had been studying fragments of alien construction alloys that had once been used in orbital shipyards. Before the exile, humans had simply copied those alloys. They had never fully understood them. Now Correa had no choice. Within 8 months, his team created something unexpected. A new composite material made entirely from resources available in the solar system. It wasn't identical to the alien alloy. It was stronger, easier to manufacture, and significantly cheaper. Within 2 years, the material had replaced nearly every alien composite used in human construction. Ship hulls, space stations, medical implants, even planetary infrastructure. The alien alloy had been impressive. The human version was better. Similar stories began appearing across the solar system. In Kyoto, a team of young physicists redesigned fusion reactors that had once relied on alien catalytic compounds. Without those compounds, the original designs no longer worked. So the scientists built something new. The result was the microfusion reactor, a device no larger than a cargo container that could produce enough energy to power an entire city. Within 5 years, energy scarcity vanished across human space. Every colony, every station, every ship. Human civilization suddenly had more power than it knew what to do with. Meanwhile, the asteroid belt was undergoing its own transformation. Without access to alien mining technology, humanity needed a way to extract massive amounts of raw materials from the countless rocks drifting through the system. The solution came from robotics. Engineers developed the first generation of self-replicating industrial drones. Machines capable of mining asteroids, processing raw materials, and constructing new drones using the resources they extracted. The first models were slow and inefficient, but machines improved quickly. Within a decade, millions of them swarmed across the asteroid belt. From a distance, the belt began to glow faintly as thousands of automated factories converted rock into refined metals and advanced components. The solar system had become a factory. Colonization accelerated. Mars, once home to a handful of scattered domes, transformed into a network of underground cities housing millions. Titan followed. Then Europa. Then Ganymede. Human settlements spread outward like water finding cracks in stone. Every hostile environment became another challenge to overcome. Acidic atmospheres, frozen deserts, radiation-soaked moons. It didn't matter. Humans built there anyway, because humans had always been good at one particular thing: solving problems. But while engineers and colonists reshaped the solar system, one scientist had been studying something far more important: the barrier wall itself. Dr. Yuki Tanaka had been a theoretical physicist when the exile began. Before the barrier appeared, her research had focused on exotic mathematical models describing the curvature of spacetime. Most scientists considered those theories interesting but impractical. Then the Concorde built a machine that manipulated spacetime directly. The barrier wall. Tanaka immediately realized something others had missed. The Concorde had not just built a prison. They had built a demonstration. The barrier was an enormous structure that folded dimensions in specific patterns to block faster-than-light travel. And every ripple in that structure produced measurable data. For the first time in history, scientists could observe spacetime engineering on a massive scale. Tanaka began studying it obsessively. She built instruments capable of detecting the smallest distortions in the wall. She mapped its gravitational patterns. She recorded every fluctuation in its structure. For 10 years she worked almost without rest. Piece by piece, she began to understand the physics behind the barrier. And as she studied it, she realized something astonishing. The Concorde had mastered faster-than-light travel by building fixed corridors through spacetime. The FTL lanes. Ships moved along those lanes like trains on tracks. It was efficient, reliable, predictable. But Tanaka realized something else. Those lanes were not the only way to travel through spacetime. If space could be folded, then two distant points could be brought together directly. Not through a corridor. Not along a fixed route. Anywhere. Any destination. Any distance. It was a radical idea. An idea that would change the future of humanity. But before that future could begin, humanity would have to take one final step. Breaking out of the cage. Dr. Yuki Tanaka realized the answer on a quiet morning in the 32nd year of humanity's exile. She had spent more than a decade studying the barrier wall. At first she had simply tried to understand it. Then she had tried to simulate it. And finally she began asking a more dangerous question. What if humanity didn't need to destroy the wall? What if they could step around it? The barrier worked by folding dimensions into a complex knot of spacetime. The Concorde had designed it to stop ships traveling along the established faster-than-light lanes used by every advanced civilization in the galaxy. Those lanes behaved like highways. Ships could move along them quickly, but they were restricted to predetermined routes. The barrier simply severed those routes around the solar system. But Tanaka had discovered something extraordinary. The Concorde had built the wall assuming every species used the same method of faster-than-light travel. They had assumed no one would try something different. That assumption would become their greatest mistake. Tanaka's equations showed that spacetime could be folded in a completely different way. Instead of opening a corridor through space, it could briefly bring two distant points together like pressing two dots on a sheet of paper until they touched. A ship would not travel through space. It would simply step across it. Point to point. Anywhere. The mathematics were terrifyingly complex. The energy requirements were enormous. But the theory worked. Tanaka called the concept slipspace folding. The first prototype was built deep within the asteroid belt, inside a research station carved into a hollowed-out iron asteroid. The laboratory was small, cold, and crowded with experimental equipment. A handful of scientists gathered around the central testing chamber. In the center of the chamber sat a small object. A probe no larger than a basketball. Inside it was the first slipspace drive ever built. Tanaka stood beside the control console, staring at the final calculations. Energy levels? She asked quietly. Stable, one of the engineers replied. Navigation lock? Confirmed. Tanaka nodded slowly. Activate. The probe hummed softly as the drive engaged. For a moment nothing happened. Several scientists exchanged nervous glances. Then the probe vanished. Not exploded. Not disintegrated. It simply disappeared. Across the room, a sensor alarm chirped. The probe had reappeared exactly 1 meter away. The room erupted into cheering. Some of the researchers laughed. Others cried openly. Tanaka didn't celebrate. She simply leaned back against the console and allowed herself a small smile. It worked. Humanity had just taken its first step outside the cage. Scaling the technology up took years. Slipspace drives required enormous amounts of energy and precise navigation calculations. The first human ships capable of using the system were small experimental vessels. But every test improved the design. 5 years later, Tanaka supervised the first full-scale demonstration. A probe launched from the asteroid station and accelerated toward the barrier wall at the edge of the solar system. On every screen in the control room, the barrier appeared as a shimmering distortion in space. A wall of folded dimensions that had sealed humanity inside its own star system for nearly half a century. The probe approached the boundary. Then its slipspace drive activated. For one terrifying moment, the sensors registered nothing. Then a signal appeared. The probe had emerged outside the barrier, beyond the solar system. For exactly 1 second it transmitted data from open galactic space. Stars, dust clouds, the vast empty darkness beyond humanity's prison. Then the drive activated again. The probe reappeared inside the solar system. The control room exploded with excitement. Humanity had just done something no species in galactic history had ever done. They had bypassed a Concord barrier wall. News of the breakthrough spread quickly through human space. But the public never learned the full details. Because by that time, another man had already realized what this discovery meant. Director Konstantin Arendt. Arendt had once been a logistics officer in the United Earth Coalition before the exile. Now he oversaw the massive industrial networks that kept the solar system functioning. He understood something immediately. If humanity escaped the barrier wall, the Concord would find out eventually. And when they did, they would not react kindly. A species that had been sentenced to isolation suddenly appearing across the galaxy with a new form of faster-than-light travel? That would terrify the Concord. Arendt knew what that fear would produce. So he made a decision. Humanity would not simply escape the cage. They would be ready for whatever waited outside. He ordered the construction of a fleet. Not a defensive fleet. A war fleet. Shipyards hidden deep within the densest regions of the asteroid belt began assembling new spacecraft. These ships were not massive dreadnoughts like the Concord favored. Human engineers chose a different design philosophy. Flexibility. Independence. The result was the Wraith-class corvette. Small, fast, heavily armed vessels built around the slipspace drive. Ships capable of appearing anywhere in a star system without warning. Ships that could strike quickly and vanish before an enemy could react. Instead of relying on centralized command structures like most alien fleets, each human ship operated independently. Each captain made decisions in real time. Each crew adapted to changing battle conditions instantly. Arendt believed that human creativity and unpredictability would become their greatest weapon. Over the next 20 years, the fleet grew. Hundreds of ships. Then thousands. Hidden within the darkness of the asteroid belt, protected by clouds of drifting rock that concealed their construction from any outside observation. But the warships were only part of the plan. Because Arendt understood something even more important. Humanity would not just escape the cage. They would leave it behind forever. Alongside the warships, massive colony vessels were constructed. Huge transports capable of carrying entire populations to new star systems. Each one packed with everything needed to start a civilization from nothing. Habitat modules. Agricultural systems. Medical facilities. Libraries containing the sum of human knowledge. These were not warships. They were seeds. Together, the fleet became known as the Exodus Armada. 200 combat vessels. 1,000 colony ships. All hidden in silence. All waiting for the moment humanity would finally step beyond the prison the galaxy had built around them. The first human ship passed through the barrier wall on a quiet Tuesday morning. No alarms sounded in the wider galaxy. No sensors detected the event. That had been the plan. The Exodus Armada did not launch in a dramatic surge of engines and fire. Instead, it moved carefully, patiently, the way human engineers had learned to do everything during the long years of exile. One ship at a time. A single corvette slipped through the barrier and vanished into open space. Several hours later, a colony vessel followed. Then another. Then another. Over the course of several months, the fleet quietly filtered out of the solar system in small groups, each one jumping to a different destination. Admiral Idris Okonkwo, commander of the Exodus Armada, had spent 2 years planning the expansion strategy. Humanity's greatest advantage was secrecy. The Concord still believed the barrier wall was perfect. They believed humanity remained trapped inside its solar system. That mistake gave humans time. And Okonkwo intended to use every second of it. The fleet did not travel to the prosperous worlds of the galactic core. Those systems had been claimed thousands of years earlier by older civilizations. Instead, the human ships went to places the Concord had rejected. Systems labeled marginal, unprofitable, or too dangerous for settlement. Worlds orbiting dim red stars. Planets with thin atmospheres. Frozen moons covered in corrosive ice. Asteroid clusters saturated with radiation. To the Concord, these places had been worthless. To humans, they were opportunities. The first colony was founded on a planet the Concord surveyors had classified as Class 7 marginal habitat. Its official catalog number was V892 Delta. Humans gave it a different name: New Carthage. The planet orbited a weak red star nearly 200 light-years from the nearest major trade lane. Its atmosphere was thin and slightly acidic. Surface temperatures rarely climbed above -20 degrees. The soil was little more than iron dust and frozen rock. To most species, the world was uninhabitable. The first human settlers landed anyway. Within a month, they had established pressurized habitats. Within 3 months, underground agricultural complexes were producing food. Within a year, New Carthage had grown into a city of 10,000 people. Factories began assembling construction materials. Mining stations extracted metals from nearby asteroids. Slipspace transports connected the colony to other human settlements forming across the frontier. The planet the Concord had ignored became a thriving industrial hub. And New Carthage was only the beginning. Human colonies began appearing across the outer regions of explored space. Frozen moons, barren deserts, dead comets drifting through interstellar darkness. If a world had resources and enough sunlight to power a reactor, humans could build there. And they did. Over the next 15 years, humanity established 47 colonies. Each one connected by slipspace travel. Ships moved between systems in minutes. Supplies flowed through the network like blood through arteries. The scattered settlements functioned as a single civilization spread across hundreds of light-years. Humanity called the network the diaspora. The Concord still had no idea it existed. Secrecy was critical. Admiral Okonkwo issued strict orders. No colony was allowed to contact alien civilizations. No ship could approach established trade lanes. Every transmission was encrypted and routed through slipspace relays that could not be intercepted. Humanity would remain invisible, at least until they were strong enough to be seen. For nearly 2 decades, the strategy worked perfectly. Then one day, a frightened merchant stumbled into the middle of it. Trade Rethus was not a successful merchant. His species, the Sarthi, were known across the galaxy for their trading networks. They were clever negotiators with a reputation for finding profit in unlikely places. Rethus had never been particularly good at it. His cargo ship was old. His profits were small. And his luck was terrible. On the day that changed history, he was fleeing pirates. 3 raider vessels pursued him through a sparsely mapped region of the frontier. His engines were overheating. His shields had already collapsed. Rethus knew he would not survive much longer. In desperation, he entered random coordinates into his navigation computer and triggered a faster-than-light jump. When his ship emerged from hyperspace, he expected empty space. Instead, he saw a city. Lights glittered across the surface of a frozen world beneath his ship. Cargo shuttles moved between orbital stations and surface habitats. Mining vessels crawled across nearby asteroids. Rethus stared in disbelief. His navigation charts insisted the system was unclaimed. Yet a massive settlement clearly existed below him. His sensors identified the ships moving through orbit. They were unfamiliar designs. Before he could react, 4 of those ships appeared beside him. They had not approached from a distance. They had simply appeared. One moment empty space surrounded his vessel. The next moment 4 human corvettes hovered within weapons range. A calm voice spoke through his communication system. "Unknown vessel, you have entered sovereign human space." The language was trade common. The accent was strange. "State your identity and intentions." Rethus swallowed nervously. "I am Trade Rethus of the Sarthi Free Merchants." He hesitated. "I am currently running for my life." The corvette scanned his damaged vessel. Another pause. Then the voice returned. "Follow us. We will help you." Rethus blinked in confusion. Alien encounters rarely ended with kindness. But he obeyed. The corvettes escorted him down to the surface of New Carthage. Human engineers repaired his engines. Doctors treated the injury on his arm he had been trying to ignore. And before he left, the human governor personally brought him a crate of supplies. No payment required. Why? Rethus asked. Governor Lena Vasquez simply shrugged. Because you needed help. Rethus left the system a few days later with a repaired ship, a full cargo hold, and a secret he could barely believe. The species that the Concord had locked behind a barrier wall was not trapped. They were building something in the darkness of the frontier. Something big. For almost 20 years, the diaspora remained a secret. Human colonies expanded quietly across the frontier. Slipspace transports moved between distant systems faster than any Concord vessel could travel through the ancient FTL lane network. Warships patrolled human territory unseen. Trade networks formed slowly among the forgotten corners of the galaxy. And the Concord never noticed. But secrets have a way of leaking into the light. The first rumors came from merchants. Sarthi traders whispered about strange ships appearing in empty systems. Independent prospectors reported encountering colonies where official surveys claimed nothing existed. Some spoke of a new civilization spreading through abandoned regions of space. At first, the stories sounded like the usual frontier myths. Every generation of traders produced rumors about hidden empires and mysterious species lurking beyond the charts. Most officials in the Galactic Concord dismissed the reports without investigation. After all, the humans were sealed behind a barrier wall. That prison had never been breached. Not once in the entire history of the Concord. It was impossible. And yet the rumors continued. Then a scout patrol stumbled onto the truth. The Thaler Dominion patrol vessel Kethrax entered the system expecting to find nothing. Their navigation charts identified the region as uninhabited. A quiet star with a sparse asteroid belt and no planets suitable for life. Routine patrol. Nothing more. But when their sensors activated, the crew immediately noticed something strange. Metal signatures filled the asteroid field. Industrial activity. Large-scale mining operations. And ships. Dozens of ships. The patrol commander leaned forward in confusion as the sensor display sharpened. The vessels were unfamiliar. Angular. Not part of any design catalog maintained by the Concord. Before the crew could react, 4 of those ships appeared around them. One moment the patrol vessel floated alone in empty space. The next moment 4 human corvettes had materialized less than a kilometer away. They had not approached from hyperspace. They had not emerged from an FTL lane. They had simply appeared. The Thaler crew stared at their sensors in disbelief. A calm voice spoke through the communication channel. Thaler patrol vessel, you have entered sovereign human space. The words sent a shock through the bridge. Human. That species had been imprisoned decades earlier. The commander hesitated before replying. This system is unclaimed territory under Concord jurisdiction. The voice answered immediately. That is incorrect. A holographic map appeared on the Thaler bridge. It displayed dozens of nearby systems marked with the same symbol. Human settlements. Human shipyards. Human territory stretching across the frontier. You are currently within the outer defensive perimeter of the diaspora, the voice continued calmly. You will now leave this system. The patrol commander looked at the 4 warships surrounding his vessel. Each one had appeared from nowhere. Their weapons were already targeting critical systems. This was not a fight he could win. He gave the order. The patrol ship turned and accelerated toward the nearest FTL lane. The human corvettes did not pursue. They simply watched the alien vessel disappear into the darkness. 3 days later, the report reached the Galactic Concord. It arrived as a single encrypted message transmitted directly to the Grand Convocation Chamber. The chamber had seen many historic moments during its 10,000 years of existence. This would become one of the most important. Representatives from hundreds of civilizations sat in their elevated platforms while the report was read aloud. Thaler patrol vessel encountered unknown ships within frontier system KX-441. The chamber remained quiet. Visual confirmation identifies vessels as human. A murmur spread across the platforms. Some delegates shifted uneasily. Others laughed. Impossible. Humanity was trapped behind a barrier wall. The report continued. Additional observations confirm presence of human industrial installations and colony settlements. The laughter stopped. A new image appeared above the chamber. It showed the sensor map captured by the patrol vessel. Dozens of star systems marked with human activity. Trade routes, shipyards, military patrols. The entire frontier filled with evidence of a civilization that was supposed to be imprisoned. Silence consumed the chamber. At the very top of the assembly, thousands of insect-like bodies stirred simultaneously. The overmind of the Thaler Dominion began processing the report. For the first time in centuries, the hive mind experienced something unfamiliar. Uncertainty. The calculations were simple. The barrier wall had not failed. Its systems were still active. Its energy levels remained stable, which meant the humans had not destroyed it. They had bypassed it. A species that the Concord had condemned to permanent isolation had somehow escaped its prison. Not only escaped, expanded. The Overmind accessed every dismissed rumor from the past 20 years. Merchant sightings, frontier anomalies, reports of unidentified ships. The pattern became obvious almost instantly. Humanity had not merely escaped the barrier. They had been building something in secret. Something large. Something powerful. And the Concord had never noticed. The Overmind felt a second unfamiliar sensation. Embarrassment. It crushed the emotion immediately. Emotions were inefficient. What mattered was the new reality. The humans were free. And they were no longer weak. The Overmind spoke. Its voice echoed through the silent chamber. The human species has violated the Concord's isolation directive. The chamber remained silent. Humanity now possesses unknown faster-than-light capabilities. Another pause. And has established unauthorized settlements across multiple frontier systems. The Overmind processed the final conclusion. This represents a direct threat to galactic order. The chamber understood what that meant. For the first time in 50 years, the Concord was preparing for war. The Concord had fought many wars during its long history. Most of them had been small, localized disputes between rival species, trade conflicts, border skirmishes that ended quickly once the Concord's enforcement fleets arrived. The Concord had been the dominant power in the galaxy for 10,000 years. Few civilizations had ever dared challenge it directly. Humanity would become the first. The decision was unanimous. The humans had violated their sentence of isolation. They had built colonies without authorization. They had developed new faster-than-light technology beyond Concord control. To the ancient civilizations of the Concord, this was not simply disobedience. It was dangerous precedent. If one species could escape Concord authority, others might try the same. The response had to be overwhelming. The Concord assembled a fleet. Not a patrol force. Not a diplomatic delegation. A punishment fleet. Over 1,400 warships gathered in orbit around the Concord's primary military shipyards. The fleet included vessels from dozens of species. Massive dreadnoughts kilometers long. Carrier ships filled with fighter craft. Heavy cruisers equipped with gravitational cannons capable of tearing smaller ships apart. It was the largest military force assembled in centuries. The fleet's mission was simple. Destroy the human colonies. Eliminate the diaspora. Re-establish Concord authority across the frontier. The fleet entered the faster-than-light lane network and began its journey toward human space. Admiral Idris Okonkwo received the warning 3 days later. Human intelligence networks were extensive. Long before the Concord fleet reached the frontier, slipspace probes had already detected its movement. The report appeared on the Admiral's command table inside the flagship Resolute Dawn. Okonkwo studied the numbers carefully. 1,400 ships. Heavy capital vessels. Carrier groups. Overwhelming firepower. A younger officer standing nearby looked uneasy. "Admiral, that fleet is almost 10 times our size." Okonkwo nodded calmly. "Yes." The officer hesitated. "Should we evacuate the outer colonies?" Okonkwo shook his head. "No." The officer looked surprised. "We can't win a direct battle against that many ships." Okonkwo smiled slightly. "That depends on what you mean by battle." He tapped the command table. A holographic map of the frontier appeared above it. Human colonies spread across dozens of systems. Slipspace travel routes connected them like a web. The Concord fleet would arrive through the traditional FTL lanes. Predictable routes. Predictable destinations. Predictable tactics. Okonkwo had studied Concord warfare for years. Their fleets moved like armies marching along roads. Powerful. Disciplined. But rigid. Human ships did not move that way. Okonkwo turned toward his officers. Prepare the fleet. Within hours, human warships began leaving their hidden bases. Wraith-class corvettes slipped into the darkness between stars, each one carrying a small crew and enough firepower to cripple ships several times its size. They did not gather in large formations. They did not march toward the enemy fleet. Instead, they disappeared. The Concord fleet entered the frontier 2 weeks later. Their arrival was exactly as expected. Massive ships emerged from the FTL lanes in perfect formation. Dreadnoughts at the center. Cruisers forming protective rings. Carrier groups deploying fighter screens. The fleet advanced toward the nearest human colony. New Carthage. Sensors detected the colony immediately. Cities glowing on the surface. Orbital stations circling above. Human vessels moving between mining operations. The Concord commander prepared the attack order. Then something strange happened. Human ships appeared. Not from hyperspace. Not from the edges of the system. They simply appeared. 30 small vessels materialized directly inside the Concord formation. Before the alien fleet could react, the human ships opened fire. Precision strikes slammed into the engines of 3 cruisers. Another human corvette launched torpedoes directly into a carrier's shield generators. The attack lasted less than 15 seconds. Then every human ship vanished. The Concord fleet scrambled to respond. Weapons locked onto empty space. Sensors searched for incoming targets. Nothing. The attackers had disappeared. Moments later, alarms sounded across the fleet. More human ships appeared behind the formation. Another strike. Another disappearance. The Concord commander realized the terrifying truth. The humans were not fighting a traditional battle. They were fighting everywhere at once. Human ships appeared in random locations across the formation, attacking engines, communication arrays, shield systems, then vanishing before retaliation could begin. The Concord fleet tried to regroup, but every attempt to reorganize triggered another sudden attack. Within hours, chaos spread through the alien formation. Capital ships struggled to maintain coordination as human vessels struck isolated targets again and again. The slipspace drives allowed human ships to jump anywhere inside the battlefield. They could strike the strongest ships, or the weakest, or simply disrupt formations until the massive fleet became a tangled mess of confused vessels. By the end of the first day, the Concord fleet had lost 50 ships. Human losses were 0. The attacks continued for 3 days. Human ships never stayed long enough to be targeted. They appeared, fired, disappeared. The Concord fleet could not predict where the next strike would come from. Morale collapsed quickly. By the 4th day, the Concord commander ordered a retreat. The massive fleet turned toward the nearest FTL lane. But even as it withdrew, human ships continued attacking. Engines exploded. Cruisers drifted powerless. Carrier groups broke apart. When the surviving Concord ships finally escaped the frontier, nearly a third of their fleet had been destroyed. The rest were badly damaged. Human losses remained minimal. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Concord had lost a war. The war ended not with a final battle, but with silence. For weeks after the Concord fleet retreated from the frontier, no alien ships entered human territory. No messages arrived through diplomatic channels. The ancient powers of the galaxy were quiet, as if the entire Concord needed time to understand what had just happened. For 10,000 years, the Concord had been the unquestioned authority of the galaxy. Its fleets had enforced peace. Its laws had shaped civilizations. And no species had ever defeated its military forces in open conflict. Until humanity, inside the grand convocation chamber of Orionis Prime, The atmosphere felt different than it had decades earlier. The same 300 alien civilizations sat in their spiral platforms. The same enormous chamber stretched upward into darkness. But the mood had changed. This time, they were waiting. Waiting for someone they had once dismissed as insignificant. At the center of the chamber, a familiar circle of white light appeared. A single human stepped forward. Ambassador Elena Marquez had grown older since her last visit. The streaks of gray in her hair had spread, and the lines on her face had deepened. But her posture remained straight. Her eyes were steady. 50 years earlier, she had stood in this chamber alone while the galaxy judged humanity. Now the situation had changed. Above the chamber's massive windows, several unfamiliar ships hovered in orbit around the station. Human ships. The Wraith-class corvettes that had shattered the Concord fleet. They were not threatening the station. They were simply present. A reminder. The Valari delegate spoke first. Its crystalline body glowed faintly as it addressed the chamber. Representative Marquez. The pause. Humanity has violated the Concord's isolation directive. Marquez nodded calmly. Yes. Another pause. You have established unauthorized settlements across frontier systems. Yes. The Valari's voice sharpened slightly. You have attacked and destroyed Concord military vessels. Marquez's reply was immediate. Those vessels entered sovereign human territory with the stated objective of destroying our colonies. A ripple of quiet agreement spread across several alien platforms. Even among the Concord's older species, that point was difficult to argue. The Valari remained silent. Then the overmind of the Thaler Dominion spoke. Thousands of insectoid bodies shifted slightly as the hive mind focused its attention on the human below. You were offered peaceful integration into the Concord. Marquez shook her head gently. No. The chamber grew still. You offered obedience. Her voice remained calm. Those are not the same thing. The overmind processed the statement. You have demonstrated military capability beyond previous Concord projections. Yes. You possess a faster-than-light technology unknown to the Concord. Yes. And your civilization now occupies 47 frontier systems. Marquez allowed herself a small smile. 52, actually. Several delegates exchanged surprised glances. The overmind remained silent for a long moment. Finally, it asked the question every species in the chamber was thinking. What does humanity intend to do now? The entire galaxy seemed to hold its breath. Marquez looked slowly around the chamber. She saw curiosity, fear, suspicion. Some species clearly expected humanity to demand revenge. Others expected conquest. After all, that was what powerful civilizations usually did. They dominated. They expanded. They ruled. Marquez shook her head. Humanity has no interest in conquering the galaxy. Murmurs spread through the chamber. She continued. For 50 years, we lived in isolation. She gestured toward the massive hall. You believed that isolation would break us. Her voice softened slightly. But it forced us to become something stronger. Images appeared above the chamber. Human colonies. Cities beneath alien skies. Shipyards hidden in asteroid belts. Research laboratories glowing with energy. Our civilization grew without interference. Another image appeared. Human engineers helping alien merchants. Human medical teams assisting wounded travelers. Human ships rescuing damaged vessels along the frontier. We learned something important during that time. Marcus paused. The galaxy is larger than the Concord. That sentence echoed through the hall. We have met species on the frontier who were ignored by your council. Species considered too small, too weak, or too inconvenient to matter. Her voice became firm. We believe every civilization deserves the chance to grow freely. The overmind studied her carefully. You propose a new political order. Marquez nodded. Yes. Another image appeared above the chamber. A map of the frontier. Human territory surrounded by dozens of smaller species that had begun forming alliances with the diaspora. Humanity offers cooperation. Trade. Mutual defense. But not control. The chamber remained silent. Some delegates looked uncertain. Others looked thoughtful. For thousands of years, the Concord had believed stability required strict authority. Humanity had proven something different. Freedom could produce strength. The Overmind considered the possibilities. If the Concord continued fighting humanity, the war might last centuries. The humans' slipspace technology made them impossible to corner. Their colonies were too widely scattered. Their fleets too unpredictable. Victory was no longer guaranteed. And there was another possibility. Alliance. The Overmind spoke again. Humanity proposes partnership rather than domination. Yes. And if the Concord refuses? Marquez shrugged slightly. Then humanity will continue building the future without you. A quiet ripple spread across the chamber. The Overmind understood something in that moment. The Concord had not simply misjudged humanity. They had misunderstood it completely. Humans were chaotic, stubborn, dangerously creative. But they were also something else. Resilient. And resilience was difficult to defeat. The Overmind delivered its final statement. The Concord will review humanity's proposal. Marquez inclined her head. That's all we ask. Outside the station, human ships drifted peacefully in orbit. Beyond them stretched the vast frontier of the galaxy. A place where new civilizations were beginning to rise. New alliances were forming. New ideas about freedom and cooperation were spreading from system to system. Humanity had once been a small species asking permission to join the stars. Now they had become something very different. Not rulers of the galaxy, but something perhaps even more powerful. The species that proved the galaxy could change. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the future of the stars was uncertain again.